Welcome to the Western Bowl podcast series, with talks on traditional spiritual teaching and its application in the world today. The intention of the series is to offer something useful for those who are drawn to study themselves and engage practice on the spiritual path. New talks are posted twice each month. The content of the talks is for informational purposes only, and not to provide any kind of counseling, medical, or professional advice. This podcast is titled Rhythm, Ritual, and Reverie. The talk was given by Mary Angelon Young on December 6, 2025 via Zoom. Angelon is a workshop leader with a background in Jungian psychology, an editor, and the author of As It Is, Under the Punai Tree, The Bowl Tradition, Caught in the Beloved's Petticoats, Enlightened Duality with Lee Lozowick, The Art of Contemplation, and other books. In this presentation, she considers how we align ourselves with existence by paying attention to life's rhythms. She describes how rhythm, ritual, and reverie are interwoven in a way that has invoked an experience of the sacred for as long as humans have been around. Angelon notes that, in reverie, we lay our burdens down, open a doorway to revelation, and attune to our deepest self. She draws on the wisdom of C.G. Jung, the poet David Whyte, her own teacher Lee Lozowick, and the myth of Demeter and Persephone. If you are interested in more on this topic by Mary Angelon, visit homesahajmandir.org and click on the Sahaja blog. And if there is benefit in this talk for you, please consider sharing the link to it or writing a review on social media or on one of the podcast platforms. Mary Angelon Young.
So I'm going to read the write-up for this talk because it was requested. How do we respond to life's great challenges, dualities, and burning questions? The rhythms of our days and nights are intricately linked with the ordinary routines that give structure and purpose to our lives. While rituals have the symbolic power to heal, to free, and renew, reverie is a moment of inspiration, which somehow connects us to the breath of life, a brief surrender into the magic and grace that moves all of creation. When rhythm, routine, ritual, and reverie become responsible, they are the sturdy boats that carry us over swift and wild currents in the river of life. This talk was originally titled Love and Freedom. So it was originally titled Love and Freedom. What is moksha anyway? The Sanskrit word for freedom or liberation. Rather than hinting toward elusive concepts of transcendental freedom, this question may have more to do with how we carry our burdens and how we lay our burdens down day to day in a radical trust in grace. It's an inquiry into how we respond, how we become truly responsible, which is a word that comes from the Latin respondere, meaning to answer in return, to promise, to pledge. What is your response? How do you invite rhythm, ritual, and reveries into your life? What happens for you in moments of inspiration and pure flow? As we move toward the winter solstice and another turning of the year, this talk will offer a perspective for deeper reflection and a moment to turn toward that which will inevitably come, change. Okay, rhythm, ritual, and reverie. So it's a very big question to begin with. How do we respond to life's great challenges, to the dualities and the burning questions that we live into every single day? Rhythm, ritual, and reverie are very interconnected. They're a woven flow that has been used to invoke knowledge and a direct experience of the sacred since human beings have been around. At least 50,000 years. Some people say 150,000 years. The rhythms of the day lead us into routines, and routines can lead us back again to ritual. And so it really does become this weave once we begin to look more deeply into what are these in our lives? What do these mean for us? And how are they active and alive for us? So before I go any further, I want to just credit the poet David Whyte for this, because I got really tremendously inspired and deeply nourished. I participated in one of his 3 Sundays. He does these regularly, 3 Sundays on a theme. It's just an hour and a half each Sunday. And one of the things that he talked about was this, he was calling it routine, ritual, and reverie. And for me, I had to go back to start with rhythm, because rhythm is really important in there. So rhythm, let's start with that. And we're going to be going through all these different R's. And if the thing that you were the most interested in about this talk was this whole idea of laying our burdens down, which I'm very passionate about, we'll get to that. But we are going to go through a lot of R's first. So rhythm. The whole universe is made of sound and vibration. And we know this for every great tradition, all the creation myths. We find it in Hinduism. We find it in Genesis in the Hebrew tradition, which was, of course, inherited by Christianity. Sound, vibration, rhythm, the pulse of life, the heartbeat of life. It's really at the origins of everything. It's a measured flow. By the way, this word measure comes from a root word that's connected to matter, which is connected to mother. Because all of these things, of course, are happening in creation in the body of the mother of the universe, the infinite body of the mother of the universe. So rhythm gives birth to cycles of becoming. The world that is becoming and the world that is ending, which is particularly poignant at this time of year because we're right at the end of a cycle. If we pay attention enough, we can align and calibrate and renew ourselves by paying attention to the rhythms of life, the rhythms of nature, the sunset, the sunrise, the cycles of the moon, how the earth moves around the sun. Everything is changing and the seasons are happening. These are all rhythms. And when we put our attention on them in a real way, in a powerful way, we can have an experience of our own place in the cosmos. We feel the connection. We feel that connection to no one's place in the web of life and the interconnected weave of everything. In the Hindu tradition, this connects us to something that's called svabhava. That's the Sanskrit word, Svabhava. Svabhava. It relates to the self and that particular resonance or taste or flavor or note or vibration that the individual is. When we feel our connection to the cosmos and to the pulse of life, we get to that connection through those rhythms. So for me, I had to start with rhythm. And of course, all of you musicians, there's all of the connections to sound, music, drum. The first instrument that has been found was a pipe, a small flute made out of the bone of a swan. Drums came much later, but we can be sure that our ancestors were sitting around a fire, just taking a couple of sticks together like this and making rhythms together, rhythms that transported them and connected them to all of life. So, yes, rhythm. So in our ordinary lives, the rhythm of life shows up often as our routines, the things that we do over and over and over again. How do you wake up? How do you go to sleep? How are you about how you eat your food? Do you have a specific rhythm of your day that is showing up in very ordinary human routine? Work, exercise, play, all of that, all of those things. These can become portals like sacred doorways. We can actually really profoundly learn something for ourselves when we start paying deep attention to them. So the routines that we have on a daily basis help us to ground ourselves. They help us to self-regulate, which is so important, especially in the world of modernity, where everything is distracting us and throwing our nervous systems off. There's so much fear. There's so much anxiety. I always feel like I have to speak to that because it's the reality that we're living in. We are not separate from it, any of it. So we have to do whatever we can to cultivate basic sanity in our lives. And routines then can become those doorways. They're literally a balm to our nervous system, but they can become even deeper doorways into how we engage our life of spiritual practice. So my teacher, Lee, he was a big enthusiast for right diet, exercise, study, all of these things very rhythmically, like somehow you would do those every day, and those become like grounding rods. He would even refer to these as the names of God, these conditions of how to live a sane life, a life that predisposes us toward a deeper knowing, a deeper revelation, a deeper understanding of what we're doing here. What's my purpose? How am I going to serve? And all of those big, big, big questions that we have to ask again and again and again, because change keeps happening. So having a conscious relationship to all of that connects us to the sacred world. But what I'm pointing toward here is that it's more than a collection of mechanical habits. There's a difference to be discovered in how we live our routines, how we curate our day. How are we doing that? Are we doing it in a way that's fluid and creative? Or are we trying to control everything? Are we controlling and buffering ourselves from reality? Because routines do have a shadow side, like everything. They have a shadow side. They can go awry. Routine and addiction is very closely linked. And I'm not going to go too far into that tonight. It's very important. I recommend all of us take a look at it, but it's beyond what I want to be exploring for tonight. So our routines can become a defense mechanism against reality. They can become a protection rather than a holy rhythm. They become a defense. They protect us from being conscious and actually feeling and being responsible to the wounds that we bear, our personal wounds, our collective wounds. And when we do that, when we use our routines in that way and they become addictive and they become very mechanical, it leads us to numbness. So we can't really have a consideration about routines and rituals and so on without being really honest, taking a good, long, hard look at ourselves again and again, taking stock of how am I doing this? One of the things that I love about David White and his work, he's very good at bringing balance. It's very inspiring, it's lofty, it's aspirational, and yet it's based in reality. And so here's an interesting thing for us to just consider, that numbness in small amounts, especially if we know that we're numb, can actually serve us, can help us turn our faces back again toward the ordinary rhythms of life, especially if we've received a big shock or we're going through a time of really deep grieving or loss, or deep investigations into the nature of our own identity and our identifications have caused us to become a bit unhinged or like we've lost our moorings. Then a little bit of numbness, in other words, a little bit of ordinary mechanical life can be a helpful thing. Everything depends on if we're aware that we're doing it. C.G. Jung is one of my life teachers, teacher for life. And this is a point that he makes again and again and again. And most poignantly, he makes it in his commentaries on the book of Taoist Alchemy, The Secret of the Golden Flower. He says, whatever state we are in, the difference between knowing that we're in that state and not knowing that we're in that state is enormous. So this is something just to consider and sort of keep it in front of us. Do I know that I'm being numb right now? I need this. I need a little buffer right now. Maybe in a few weeks or maybe tomorrow, I'll be able to take a different turn toward this. I'll be able to allow myself to feel into this more deeply. So routines can be very life-sustaining. So here's a question. How do you calibrate your relationship to the flow of time in ways that are fluid and creative? How are you doing it these days? How does a routine become a ritual of renewal and a true response to life? We keep refreshing how we see and feel our routines. We keep looking at or feeling into, how am I when I'm making my morning coffee? There we're in the domain of routine and possible addiction if caffeine is involved. There's so many different ways to be addicted, so many different ways, not just to substances, but to lots of other things. Movies, for example. I adore movies. Don't get me wrong. I love movies and art of all kinds. So I'm all for being passionate about that. Is there an inner depth? Is there this awareness going on, this awareness of what I'm doing when I make my morning coffee, when I go for my walk, there's so many things. I decide to have whatever it is that I've promised myself I'm not going to eat, but now I'm going to eat that, or I'm going to do that thing, whatever that is. Can I bring awareness to it? So routines that have emerged out of a true rhythmic relationship with life are this is a quote from David White. I love this. It's how we worship at the altar of timelessness. How do we establish creative routines that nurture our investigation into life and into reality? Here's another question. Do you have a place, a temenos, to use the alchemical term, a sacred place in space and time, or even in your imaginal world? Maybe a place in your house, maybe a place that is a dwelling in your heart, in the temple of your heart, where you can feel connected to timelessness, to the vast rhythms of the cosmos, where you get a sense of connectedness that mysteriously emerges out of that timeless place, or out of that place of not knowing, of just not knowing. One more thing, and then we can stop and take a couple of questions. I'm working my way to, are we going to lay our burdens down? A little bit more on ritual, how our routines can become ritual for us, because what is a routine, we bring consciousness and awareness and intention to it, can actually lead us into the sacred. So our routines are rituals in disguise. How do you create and enact rituals that allow you to visit the doorways where the horizon opens for you? Our rituals can be rituals of exploration, of asking questions that cannot be answered, of inviting the self to be present. Here's another little piece from David White that I've really appreciated so much, and I want to share it with you. This is a quote from him. He says that our inspiration, our enthusiasm, and the upwelling that we may experience in our relationship with ritual or with creativity, he says it's part craziness and part brilliance. Crazy, from his perspective, is the doorway to brilliant. This is a person who has published volumes of poetry, gives teachings worldwide. He's an amazing spiritual teacher and a really great poet and a deep meditator. David says, by worldly standards, our craziness and depths are unsanctified. Okay, they're not holy. They're not sacred. We're scared of our craziness. David White says, I am more interested in the crazy than in the brilliant. If you take care of your crazy with ritual and routine, then brilliant will take care of itself. Because brilliant and inspired and in states of flow, this is actually our true state. It's our actual true nature. It's our crazy, our wild craziness that we need to take care of with ritual and routine. David White says, what arises inside of us often feels subversive to our surface personalities. Your melancholy and your disappointment are part of the gift. Include it in your art form, in your creative ritual, and in your reveries. So the ancients, people of the ancient world, they answered a lot of the big questions that we have in life through communal ritual. We reach these threshold moments in our lives, these turning points, crossroads, where we really are forced to ask the big questions. Which direction should I take? What am I truly good at? What do I have to offer the world? How will I serve? What creativity wants to express itself through me? What is being offered as a gift, something that I need to develop within myself? What are my actual limitations? Where is illusion at work in my life? How am I projecting on others? How am I buffering myself? These are actually big ongoing questions. Communal rituals are very, very powerful. There's all of these rituals that we can have day to day ourselves, like just the simple lighting of a candle is a powerful act. And it sounds so simple and it sounds like maybe it's too simplistic. But in fact, it can actually shift the mood quite radically if we pay full respect and full attention to it. If we let it, it can do that. So we are creating rituals in our daily lives. Might be things like giving prayers, making different offerings if you have an altar, a puja, a place where you worship, a temenos. But then there are these communal rituals. In communal rituals, we have this opportunity to have our energies and our attention and our being augmented in ways that a lot more becomes available to us. And I was inspired thinking about this because it's early December and because the winter solstice is coming. And we're at one of those threshold moments in the cycle, the season of the year, the rhythm of the year. And it came to my attention again the other day, something that I've explored many times over the years, and that's this ancient mystery school that existed in Greece, starting almost 4,000 years ago. Some of you will be very familiar with this, I'm sure. This mystery school, it's called the Eleusinian Mysteries, the mystery school at Eleusis. This went on for 1,000 years in the Middle East, and people came to it from all over the Mediterranean world. It was not in any way only for people of Greece, people from Africa, Egypt, what's now Italy, and places far beyond came to participate in this ritual. Even if you were a slave, of course, in those days, there were lots of slaves. Even if you were a slave, you could participate. Rich people, aristocrats, beggars. The only condition was that you could not be a murderer. You could not be a murderer and participate in the mysteries at Eleusis. But everybody else, the door was open. If you were willing to go, and it usually happened in September, and it was a 9-day ritual that started with going to the sea, cleansing, all kinds of different purifications and cleansing acts, and then eventually making way like a pilgrimage to the place called Eleusis. And entering into this sacred theater, it's very dark. They're going to tell the story, but actually live it, reenact it, of Demeter and Persephone. And Persephone's, of course, the daughter of Demeter, who is innocent and precious and charming and sweet and all things that 16-year-old girls are. And she's walking in the fields of flowers one day, just enjoying the sunshine and the blue sky and picking flowers in all of her innocence and sweetness. And suddenly the hand of Hades comes up from the ground and pulls her into hell. This is a very deep story. I won't go into a lot of depth with it, but it is a story about what happens when innocence is initiated into a much bigger expansion of awareness and responsibility. Because she's a maiden, but she's going to be initiated into the mystery of death and rebirth, death and rebirth, death and rebirth. It's hard for us to imagine what this was like for the ancient Greeks. 1,000 years, people were making pilgrimages from all over to do this. Because as the writers like Cicero and others have said, this was so powerful for people. People who went through this ritual no longer had a fear of death. because of their participation in the rite, they came away with a deep, direct experience of having died and being reborn, and knowing that all things do die and all things are reborn and renewed. 1,000 years of sacred ritual and sacred theater. One of the things that Cicero says about that ritual is that because that ritual of initiation into deeper mysteries of life and death and death and birth and death and birth and death and birth, because of that ritual, that literally human consciousness evolved from a more barbaric state to a state of a greater civilization and greater evolutionary awareness in humanity. Of course, Demeter goes through all kinds of grief, and it's the story of how the seasons get born. Because before Persephone is taken to the underworld, there are no seasons. There's only perpetual summer and perpetual abundance. And when Persephone is taken, Demeter is thrown into such a state of grief that everything withers and dies. And Zeus and the other gods have to get together and convince Hades that he has to let Persephone come back to the middle world and be with her mother 6 months out of the year. So this is the beginning of the rhythm of the seasons.
I was thinking about the creative process when you were talking about taking care of the crazy, and the brilliance will take care of itself. And I'm a musician, I'm a guitar player, and anytime I've created something that was outside of myself, it felt like I was doing something crazy, betraying my patterns and my routines. And what came out of that is usually something that I remember for the rest of my life, or something that's born out of that. But it does feel like a craziness to create, and what comes is that after effect. But it's something that takes some courage, some bravery, and unknowing.
Oh, that's so true. Yeah, courage is a great word there. It's so true. And there's the craziness of creativity. I can relate to what you're saying. I play the piano, and it's true in writing also, in the creativity of writing. You kind of go crazy when you're writing. My experience is there's some craziness to writing a book or a poem or a series of poems, because you get undone in a way in the process. So there's that craziness. And then there's the craziness that comes out of our woundedness, that comes out of our confusion, that comes when we're in deep states of illusion. David Whyte, he's a great poet, and he's been down into the underworld. he's been through that initiation probably many, many times, as a lot of us have. And when we're having times like that, relying on routine and ritual, this can really make a difference. Thank you for sharing that.
From a book I'm reading, it's the Zen Sayings of Kodo Sawaki. It's a home press book about the crazy part of it. When you're kind of out there on a limb, I could really relate. One of his little epithets, he says, as a human being, whatever you do, you should do it in a way that can't be done a second time. What can be repeated is best left to the robots.
That's great.
I just love that little notion. Thank you.
That's keeping your routines refreshed, like a certain unknowing.
I was thinking, in times of crazy, I tend to forget. I don't think about rituals or rhythms. I'm just swept away in the moment. It's usually when I have some kind of sanity that I do think about deepening my practice through some kind of ritual or routine. That's really important to me. The way that I do that occurs to me while you're talking, is morning practices of meditation, and some things that I think about every morning. I think about my death every morning. I think about gratefulness every morning.
Mm-hmm.
I think about what practices I would like to engage during the day, even though I'll forget about it 5 minutes later, but then it'll come back to me during the day. But at times when crazy comes, for whatever reason, which seems to periodically, whether it's chemistry or what trigger that I'm not always aware of, I forget about all this for a period of time. Anything that you would say about that or how to work with that?
Well, to begin with, it's a natural part of the process. I think this thing we're calling crazy, being in a state of being undone in a way, or accessing these states of, I don't know anything right now. I've talked about this many times in different talks of like, you don't really know that you're on the true path until there's no path. That kind of thing. You have to get lost before you can find yourself. These are deep truths of how the path unfolds and the cycles and rhythms that we go through. It seems to me over a number of years of engaging with different practices that one of the ideas of practice is that the more we do it, the more it gets anchored in us. So maybe our time of forgetting, of not remembering, of being undone, of being in the crazy, whatever crazy it is, it becomes shorter. And we remember, oh, yeah, I'm just going to clean the house. I'm just going to make the bed. I'm just going to do the next right thing. I'm just going to make some good food. We anchor these things the more we pay attention when we do have awareness, when we have the capacity, when we're really present, we keep anchoring them for ourselves. And we find ways. You will find ways to do that. But there's this like really essential question of knowing when we're suffering. Super important.
I do find that forgetfulness happens less frequently, but there's more of a gap between times when a particular state will take over. And yet, still at those times, to remember to make some good food or to do something like that that will anchor me is a challenge.
Well, yeah, it is a challenge. And also, for me, what we're calling crazy, as I grow older, it's much more of an internal state. And some of my rhythms of daily life and my routines of daily life, this is really basic. I have this commitment. I make my bed up first thing every morning. And so sometimes I'll have a morning when I'm like, I just want to leave the bed however it is when I got out of it. But I find it to be something that is grounding for me. It's a touchstone. It's a very, very simple thing. And maybe it might be something like the first thing you do is you make some hot water to drink. Drinking hot water in the morning is a really good thing for us. Probably a lot of us do that already, but if you don't, you might want to think about it. It's an old Ayurvedic good habit, good choice. Make the hot water for yourself, then have your coffee or your black tea or whatever you're going to have, your green tea, your specialty. Just little things like that, little practical things that we can anchor. And they actually become ritualized and they become like sacred world. Okay, doorway into sacred world, doorway into remembrance. Put the kettle on, go light the candle on the altar, say your mantra. If you say a mantra, say the nama. If you say a nama, the name of God, or just offer up a little thought of gratitude. Thank you for this day. Really simple, really, really simple. You know, the thing about crazy also that I want to mention here, which leads us into the next section about our burdens, is rituals are a way that we invoke divine help. However it is that we understand that. And that is really unique and different as it should be for each person. We might be practicing within a religion, or we may not be practicing or living our spiritual life, our path of transformation through an organized religion. Doesn't matter. It's between you and the divine. So rituals and routines are a way that we ask for divine help. And when we ask for divine help, this is the beginning of laying our burdens down. And it's also the beginning of humility. And humility goes a very long way toward finding our place in the cosmos. My teacher Lee used to say, it is like the most rare of all the qualities, of all the virtues. Very few people have it, which is a good reason to cultivate it because it's such a blessing. It's such an incredible blessing. And one other thing about when crazy is present before we move on to burdens, I just want to mention this, that sometimes the only right next thing to do that will actually help us remember our purpose is to do something of service, some service to another person, something very small or big. So when we invite divine help, we lay our burdens down, and it's the dawn of humility for us. And of course, that's something that we'll come back around to again and again, like a rhythm, like the patterns in our lives. So what burdens am I carrying? Let's ask ourselves, what burdens am I carrying that are not mine to carry? The suffering in the world? To lay our burden down about the suffering in the world does not mean that we don't care about it or that we don't feel pangs of sorrow. It means that we no longer think that we alone can bear that burden or we alone have to somehow fix it. It's way beyond our pay grade. We can pray. We can pray. But have we burdened ourselves because it's really beyond us? What about burdens I've carried for too long? And those burdens are asking to be released. Burdens of guilt, of shame, of regret, of grief. What about the burdens that only the gods and goddesses can carry for us? The burdens that only the divine can carry for us? When have you looked up at the night sky and surrendered and said, "Oh, cosmos, I release this burden to you. Take this burden from me because I can't fix this," to realize that we can't fix it. We can't make it right. Life is full of these insoluble problems. How do we grow beyond the insoluble problem? We begin to realize that we might be unnecessarily suffering. It's not doing any good. It's only keeping us from a true response to life. And this piece in here, I want to say, was really inspired by the Emerald podcast, and it's titled Lay Your Burdens Down. It's quite beautiful. I recommend it. This goes hand in hand with this realization that we are not gods, we are human beings. And while it's true that all of the gods and all the goddesses and the divine live in us and we live in that, at the same time, we are human. We are human beings. Sometimes we must turn it over to a power that is greater than our human selves because we are carrying weights that we are not prepared to carry or are even meant to carry. What am I prepared for? What am I truly meant to carry? Because I do have burdens to carry. This isn't about not having any burdens, because living in life and our humanity, we are carrying certain burdens and blessings. The burdens and the blessings, that's a paradox because they're both happening at the same time. Every burden is a blessing, but we want to be carrying the burdens that the divine has given to me to carry, not somebody else's. What am I meant to carry? What am I meant to be responsible for? What am I ready to carry? What do I need to turn over to surrender to the divinity of my understanding? Many of us have studied different religious traditions and different mythic traditions the world over, gods and goddesses and divine forces and angels and spirit forces, all of these forces that create and sustain and destroy. And even those forces that destroy, like say Shiva in the Hindu tradition, he's the god who oversees destruction. He's called the compassionate one. Even he and his Mahashakti, Parvati, they are sustaining life because death has to happen for the next rhythmic cycle of birth. So all of the gods and goddesses, they carry these implements and ornaments. These are symbols of their power their divine powers to sustain. And the thing about symbols, there's 3 different levels. There's the practical middle world, literal level, there's the metaphorical level, and there's the universal level of a symbol where you've hit the place beyond words, the mystical reality of the symbol. When we're considering symbols, or we're considering symbolic stories and myths, or we're listening to them or being informed by them, we understand, like at the first level, that, say, Persephone and Demeter are in me. It's about me. It's about this individual and how this individual goes through these cycles of death and rebirth. But on another level, as we go deeper and deeper, like the Sufis say, every sacred story has 7 levels of meaning. As we go deeper and deeper, we're talking about actual living divine forces that sustain life, and they are bigger than us. And this is important for us to know, that we can actually invoke and ask for help from those divine aspects or streams or currents or beings in creation that will sustain us, that will support us. And there's a lot to be said about ancestors and teachers in our gurus and our spiritual lineages. And then there's beings like Ganesh. His whole thing is helping us carry our burdens. This is why people of Hindu faith love him so much. He's so beloved. He's the remover of obstacles. So all of these gods and goddesses, they have these conchas that they carry. They have damarus, the drums, which are beating out the rhythm of cosmic time and of cycles of death and rebirth. So I'm going to read you a little quote here from the Emerald. I like to move into this idea of laying down our burdens to those divine forces, that those burdens actually belong there. This is a quote. We assume we are the conch bearer and the thunderbolt wielder, the one who carries the damaru to measure the rhythms of time. We assume we are the great peacemaker, the conversation uplifter, or the vibe checker, or the truth wielder. We assume we are Atlas, holding up the very cosmos and the entire world. That's a pretty big burden. But it turns out we don't have to carry that prayer to the heavens. The wind horse does that. The turning prayer wheel does that. The juniper smoke carries that prayer. The feather carries the life breath of healing. The water carries the songs and stories to the listening ear. Everything is supported by life. Everything is carried by other things. This is relationality. He's speaking here about the web of life, the interconnected reality of all things in oneness, and how there is support in that. There is support for helping us to bear the burdens that we bear. And there is support for receiving those burdens that we need to give over. He continues, someday when we pass on, we will be carried by forces beyond our control, specific forces whose role it is to carry spirits across. There are guides, there are boatmen, there are psychopomps of all manner and stature whose role it is to carry us from one realm to the next. How many billions of souls has Charon, the mythic ferryman of ancient Greece, the son of deep night, carried across the river Styx? For how many has he provided safe passage through to the other world? And all that is required is that you remember to bring a couple of coins. Coins for the boatman, coins in the mouth, coins in the eyes, as in the old death tradition. And for those who couldn't afford the boatman's fare in ancient Greece, for those who didn't have any coins to spare, they could offer these words from the Orphic tablets instead. They could say, carry me, for I am a child of earth and starry heaven. Give me to drink of the cold water flowing from the lake of memory. As long as there is offering, as long as there is conscious connection to the web of life, then we will be carried by the web itself. We can carry each other through these times, and there are great forces to carry us and carry our whispered longings, carry our dreams for a better world. Carry me, spirit forces. Carry these longings, these hopes, these dreams. Carry my deepest wishes and hopes and prayers for the world and for all people, animals, trees, plants, rivers, oceans, and clouds. So sometimes we do carry each other, and this is an important piece to remember in this while we're stirring all of this up and considering it. When the burden is very great for someone, we do carry each other. At times of birth, at times of death, if you've ever sat with someone who's dying, when there is sickness or there is privation or loss, or the burden is just so great for the other. They're in the crazy. They're in the crazy time. Sometimes we sit with each other and we listen. We listen to someone talk about their crazy state right now. This is so beautiful. This is such a beautiful service to offer, to carry someone else's burden even just for an hour of listening, and then we can let it go. So this whole idea of letting go of the burdens that are not ours to carry, it kind of comes down to becoming truly human. Then maybe the most important thing that we have to do while we're here is to discover the true soulful nature of being fully human, which carries, of course, great possibilities and potentials and great burdens. Just remember, we're not gods and goddesses. It's very dangerous to identify with these these are living forces, they're divine forces. It can be a very dangerous thing to do. Well, I've been very compelled by all of this in my own path and my own life, and this question about letting go of the things that I don't need to be carrying, that are actually in the way. And this is a great time to be doing that because here we are at the end of 2025.
With ritual, the elements are important to me. And a lot of what you're reading speaks about that. The wind and the water is a really important element in ritual. And mantra, of course, so sound. And I wonder if you have any more to say about that.
I do. I started with the importance of connecting to the rhythms of nature. I have found that when all else fails, go outside, watch the sun go down, go to a tree. I mean, this sounds it doesn't matter how it sounds. I adore trees. I love trees. I find them to be a great source of refuge. Water, yes, definitely. So what I'd like to do is read this poem because it really speaks to what you're talking about. And this is by an Irish poet. His name is John O'Donoghue. When the rhythm of the heart becomes hectic, time takes on the strain until it breaks. Then all the unattended stress falls in on the mind like an endless, increasing weight. The light in the mind becomes dim. Things you could take in your stride before now become laborsome events of will. Weariness invades your spirit. Gravity begins falling inside you, dragging down every bone. The tide you never valued has gone out, and you are marooned on unsure ground. Something within you has closed down, and you cannot push yourself back to life. You have been forced to enter empty time. The desire that drove you has relinquished. There is nothing else to do now but rest and patiently learn to receive the self you have forsaken in the race of days. At first, your thinking will darken and sadness will take over like listless weather. The flow of unwept tears will frighten you. You have traveled too fast over false ground. Now your soul has to come to take you back. Take refuge in your senses. Open up to all the small miracles you rushed through. Become inclined to watch the way of rain when it falls slow and free. Imitate the habit of twilight, taking time to open the well of color that fostered the brightness of day. Draw alongside the silence of stone until its calmness can claim you. Be excessively gentle with yourself. Stay clear of those vexed in spirit. Learn to linger around someone of ease who feels they have all the time in the world. Gradually, you will return to yourself, having learned a new respect for your heart and the joy that dwells far within slow time. That's a poem titled For One Who is Exhausted. And the long quote that I read just a little while ago, that's from the podcast, The Emerald. And it's a recent episode, and it's titled Lay Your Burdens Down. It's quite wonderful. So we're going to move on pretty soon here to Reverie, but I want to say just a couple of more things about ritual. We cultivate ritual through the routines of our lives or through very intentional ritual, very symbolic ritual. There's always this possibility that revelation may be present for us. And of course, that's another R word. I love R words: revelation, remember, routine, ritual, reverie, rhythm, all R words. So we cultivate ritual and revelation by being present, by coming here, being present. And sometimes that does take an act of will. Sometimes we're not able to do it because we need to stay in crazy a little bit longer. Sometimes we can be in crazy and call ourselves to presence. And this isn't about judging oneself at all, by the way. There's no judge or blame. It's just being aware of our state of being, just bringing awareness. And that's very healing in and of itself. Being able to name it even. So important. So being present through paying attention in the meanderings of the path and all the unexpected things that will happen to us, the shocks, the turnings of the wheel that arise. How do we know? How do we answer these questions? When to take the shortcut or the side road that appears, or just stay on course? When to eat the whole sandwich, so to speak, and when to eat only half? When should the medicine be homeopathic, and when should it be allopathic? You know, these are literal questions, but they're also metaphors. They're also symbolic. Can y'all relate to some of these questions? So the more we're able to cultivate this awareness and awareness of our different state where we are, the more we can practice being present with reality, the greater is our capacity for life and the greater our capacity for being human and for actually being useful and being of service and discovering that elusive sense of purpose. How that unfolds day to day, because it might manifest differently, and it will at different times. Ritual is one of the ways that we adorn our consciousness. I give a lot of writing workshops and lead writing groups, and I do that with two of my very, very dear friends and colleagues, Regina, Sarah Ryan, who many of you know, and a very dear friend and colleague, Christina Sell. And I'm very fond of saying we need to cultivate a poetic basis of mind. This is actually a very deep and fertile avenue of investigation. Being present, not only is it healing for us when we are present in the moment, it is a healing balm for the world. Through presence, we come to experience wonder and awe, and we court the possibility of reverie. Just a quick little aside here from my mentor, C.G. Jung. He says, quote, "If our religion is based on wonder, our chief emotion will be gratitude." There's a little more to that quote, but we'll stop there for that one. So reverie. In reverie, we lay our burdens down. And don't we know it? When we have a moment when we're in flow, when inspiration is flowing, or we're just deeply relaxed, our minds are just allowed to just sort of float on the clouds. Or maybe that's what we're doing. We're actually just looking at the sky. As the Rig Veda tells us right at the beginning, contemplate the nature of the sky. So moments of reverie, we lay our burdens down and we discover what is true. We really open the doorway to revelation. And we're not seeking it. We're not eager for it or anxious about it or asking for it. We're just being there in that moment, letting the reverie take us and floating on the waves, drifting on the delight of that moment. And then somehow something comes to us. Some precious piece of insight comes to us. Some little still quiet voice gives us, okay, go this direction. Something falls into place inside of us, something we've been questioning and wondering about in ourselves. We've been in a deep inquiry, maybe for a long time about something. In a moment of reverie, something can just fall into place, just clicks in. Oh, yeah, right. Okay. We can hear the voice of our own soul, or the self, if you prefer. In reverie, we may discover freedom and grace. We touch divine moments, moods, rasas. We open doorways to letting go of all that we are holding on to, which does not belong to us. Letting go all that we've outgrown, or those things that we just took on us as a burden of our childhood, and the ways that we were indoctrinated in religion, the ways that we had childhood experience that wounded us and formed how we survive in the world. Maybe some of that is just going to fall away through this process. Because in reverie, we're really attuning to our own deepest self. We're listening, but we're not efforting it. There's no effort. We're not grasping for it. We're not trying to get it. We're just receptive in reverie. It's a very receptive state. I turned 75 last month. I don't know, there may be someone who's older than me on this call. I'm not sure. Well, so you know that it doesn't stop. It never stops, right? What is hidden inside you is still taking form. It is still asking to emerge, to be brought forth. And, you know, I love butterflies. I have a thing for butterflies. I really love them. But one of the reasons I love them is because in order to be the butterfly, the worm has to become completely liquid. It loses its entire form and it's suspended there in a completely liquid state that has no form. I just adore that as a metaphor. Here's something for us to consider about that, because that ongoing process, it never stops happening for us. If we're willing, we can stop it. We can shut the whole thing down. We can say, I'm done, retire from life. I don't mean retire from your job. I mean, retire from life. I'm not going to do anything but buffer myself and fall into complete numbness and isolation. And it's very sad when, and many humans go this way. But we're lucky. We're considering these things tonight. We're keeping our inquiry and our longing and our deep commitment, our samaya vows, as they say in Buddhism, our vows to practice on the path of transformation for the good of all beings. Of course, we're included in that. We keep that alive. We keep it living and we keep refreshing it and letting it go through its cycles of death and birth and trusting it will still be there. So reverie can be a moment of transfiguration. Maybe we've been in a liquid state for a while, and then we just hit this moment of reverie and something is able to take form and emerge. In this life, in this modern world that we live in, it's too often the case that we are hiding what is trying to take form in us in the world, what's trying to emerge. And we also hide it from ourselves when we're doing that. But we need to hide it for a while so that it can grow. back to the butterfly, it does have to be in the dark for a while. But there's that tendency to hide it, to keep it hidden from the world. So in these moments of transfiguration, it's a moment of recognition, a moment of remembrance. We remember the question that we refused to ask. And this is a quote from David White. He says, "We remember the question we have refused to ask, for that question taps the clear stream of an internal source that can be given to no one but you." Here's another quote from him that I like. "Reverie is a particular bid for freedom." He says, "To be equal to meet the ferocity of the world, we must find the wildness in ourselves, the unbridled, the unfettered, the inexplicable, the bewildered, the wilderness of the crazy inside, and then find a narrow path between crazy and brilliant. Brilliant is the fruit of the harvest of ritualized contact with the source that produces energies and powers that have been unrecognized in our lives." The more we're cultivating this day to day in our lives, the more capacity we have to respond to whatever life is bringing our way.
What comes up for me about all this is actually the literalness of the consideration. What burdens am I carrying that are not mine to carry? I mean, actually, what are they? And I can name those, having to do with grief I have and with letting go of how things are going to be for my adult children, and what burdens am I meant to carry?
Mm-hmm.
And I think I can name those too. This is really helpful to make some distinctions about things that take up a lot of energy that may not be helpful.
I love this R word, respond, as it said in the write-up for this evening's consideration. Respond comes from respondere, the Latin meaning to pledge, to promise. I really like that because there's this interesting thread between how we respond and the promise of our own being, the promise of the incarnation that we've taken, the promise of who we are still becoming. And really, in a very ultimate sense, it seems to me that even that is not my burden. I don't know. It gets back to the old prayer, "Thy will be done." And that's really taking refuge in grace and in cultivating faith in the ultimate benevolence and love and support and sustenance that life is, that the divinity is, and that it's completely seamless. That divinity is everything that we see, the sunset and the sunrise. That's just another beautiful face, especially if you live in the Southwest in Arizona, where we have awesome sunsets. Not every night, but lots of times. So I want to thank you so much for your kind attention. And I'm going to end with this poem by David White. David White, his last name is spelled Whyte. He's Irish. He's an Irish Anglo poet. I'll end with this. The title is Intimate Invitation. You forget how, even when you were stuck and without faith, held back and afraid to move even a little, you could still be like the beauty we see in winter ice, just beginning to break and flow. You forget how you once saw so clearly the brave outline of a single leaf, how the stream of clouds in the sky seemed to run right through you, and the sun on your skin seemed to pass right through some inner complexion. And because after all this time, you have lived for so long without faith in your own joys and in your own grief, you live daily saying love as if it were still far away. Put down your heavy burden and rest from the hard, everyday labor of not hurting, not feeling or not hearing or not saying or seeing. Stop keeping the tears at bay. Give it all up. Just come home. So, thank you again for being here, for joining in our communitas, our community. I like this word communitas because it really speaks to the spirit of community, which can show up with any group of people, anywhere, at any time. It's completely universal and very, very human. So thank you for being part of this communitas tonight.